NHS staff are boycotting Palantir. No great surprise,
No
I don't
surprise
think,
there,
as in
no.
sentiment-wise, but I don't know if there's going to be any knock-ons there.
I mean, I think this is going to be the tip of the iceberg going forward, and it's what happens when you don't have sovereign capability yourself. I mean, the things that the staff have been complaining about, my understanding is not only was it sort of impinged on them top down with very little consulting, it's the fact that it's an American company, an American defense company. You know, it's the same story about all the guardrails and what happens to that data. You know, probably the largest data set of health data in one single place around the world, even though it's sort of distributed across the NHS, but one organization at least. And the fact that a British company is not doing something with that and isn't funded to do that, you know, this is what happens if you get behind the curve on this technology, and this will continue now across every industry, across every sector, across every part of government, unless we decide to catch up and compete in the race and be an AI power in the same way that we're a nuclear power.
Well, do you think we can? I mean,
yeah, throw money at the problem. I mean, we were 4 years late with the hydrogen bomb. We still got there, right?
But just to give this some context, so Palantir won this contract in 2023, and I think the timing of that is very important. And it looks like it's a blank check up to around 450 million, which is a big chunk of change. And as you were talking about, Andrew, this kind of trust gap thing that has been exposed now, the NHS staff making the news cycle is a big thing. So this is going to be a point of conversation for other public sector workers, I have no doubt.
I think
I'm
it's the
trying
first
to work
of many.
out where the opportunity is, if there is anything for UK health tech founders, whether there is somebody that could potentially take the place of Palantir. Is there even looking beyond the UK, is there a European challenger that could fill this gap? So they were the questions. I don't know if either of you had any reflections on those questions.
Well, if you think about hospitals in general, you know, the big platform systems that have been put in place in the US is Epic and Cerner, and they've started to infiltrate the European market. Personally, think there's a huge opportunity to build an Epic or Cerner for Europe and or the UK.
Are there any, do you know, Lomax? Are there any kind of contenders on the way?
Well, I've backed one. It's a pre-seed. But
there you go. Talk your book, baby. Come on.
Yeah. They're a great team out of Italy. But I do think there's a big opportunity there. It's going to require, you know, savvy founders moving fast, but also moving fast and probably not breaking things in this sense. You know, selling into healthcare is actually moving fast and steadily and carefully, probably. It's heavily regulated and there's a massive trust-based component. So the sales cycle from a startup perspective will be very, very long. So you need to have founders who build that around the company around that, and will need to be very, very good at fundraising for sure, and taking people on the journey and building trust with it's a B2G sale at the end of the day. Often it's not always B2G because there's a lot of private providers in Europe too. But I think that's a huge opportunity.
How close are your Italian team to actually being a vendor?
They're already a vendor, but they're at the moment for specific point, with the early product. But the plan is, of course, to expand over time. But they're very, very early stage. Okay. I mean, this would be a journey where they need to raise.
I mean, there are companies that are building great businesses. I mean, Arcurex, who I advised very, very early on when they first started, pivoted from trying to solve the problem of antibiotics being prescribed, but they identified an issue of communications and administration problems between patients and the clinics. They started with GPs. I think they've got 98% coverage of GPs in the UK, 350,000 NHS users. I think like over 50 million patients being supported there, and they're actually expanding the other way to the US. So they've done extremely well. So it is possible to, and in their case, they went bottom up, which was a fantastic kind of viral approach. And they got funded by Atomico. So it is possible to build these businesses, but the founders out there with the ambition, it's the same old story. You've got to be able to raise the cash, especially when you're talking about these much larger platforms. Palantir has been around a long time, and especially when you're talking about going forward to AI. So that's the challenge. It's founders will go where they need to survive, and until we plug that capital gap, they'll go where the money is.
We're going to talk about that in defense tech.
We're going to talk about that in the context.
Same problem.
But today, if you want to build a $1 billion revenue health tech company in Europe, it's basically impossible in Europe. You have to go to the US. Like, as a reminder, health is 20% of US GDP. It's an insane number. So the proportion is much higher than any other country in Europe, and the absolute number is multiples of what we have in Europe. So if you want to build a generational health tech company, basically you have to go to the US. Okay.
Yes.
And we've seen that, AccuRx going there now. There's a company called Anima Health, which started in the UK, which is now doing incredibly well in the US. There's tons of examples. Obviously, Hinge Health came out of the UK. Sword Health came out of here in Portugal. And they're now, I think, 350, $400 million revenue companies. But taking this back. So I do think if Europe wants to benefit from sovereign systems for its hospitals, and obviously these are, because there's a lot of state sponsorship of these systems, unlike in the US, like these are a massive component of the increased costs that the increased amount that it costs to run a country in Europe.
I saw a few American, was it Matt Miller from Sequoia? He was knocking this idea of sovereign tech, calling it welfare, which I thought was quite interesting.
Well, I mean, but even that, maybe the word sovereign is being thrown around a bit too much these days. But if you want to build homegrown companies that you feel proud of and actually deliver value for your economy, then you need to encourage them and give them the environment in which to flourish. Just maybe stepping back to this Palantir thing, there's a broader question for Palantir, I think, like, can they as a business have a go-to-market in both defense and in healthcare? To actually potentially quite contradictory things, because interestingly, this problem also happened in New York. So it's not just the kind of, it's not just a sovereignty anti-American thing. Within like the New York healthcare system, they are not going to renew Palantir contracts for a similar reason, right? So that's probably a little bit politicized, I'm sure, as well. But the point is that they have that question. But there's also the question, which also could take place in any country, in any company, is to what extent does it matter, and should you listen to your employees as to either who you do business with or who your suppliers are? Remember this issue came up a lot.
Well, if they're the ones on the front line, if they're the ones using the system.
Well, and actually this came up if you remember, in a slightly different context, but this came up in 2018, 2019 in the US, when the big tech companies were winning contracts with Pentagon, right? Do you remember the HoloLens contract that Microsoft had in 2019, the $480 million contract they had with the Pentagon, and all the Microsoft employees, a section of them, a cohort of them, complained about it. And I think Satya Nadella said to them, actually, guys, we're going to do this contract. You can be reallocated to another account if you want. The same thing happened at Google in 2018. And in that case, I think that Sundar actually listened to the employees and did not renew the contract with the Pentagon. So there is a kind of broader question as to how much you as a company either listen to your employees about who you sell to, or in this case, in the NHS, who you buy from. And I do think, as you say, Dan, like they are people on the front line. You would be stupid not to take their opinions into account. They're the ones having to plug the sensitive data into this software and or use it. I do think part of this is just like, as I said, the kind of Palantir specific issue is like going to market in two markets. I mean, you've got the bloody chairman of Palantir, Peter Thiel, I think, is quoted on record as saying that the NHS is actually better at making people sick than better than making them better, which is well, you've got the chairman of a company for a big client saying things like that, then, that's I guess a very Palantir specific thing. But at the end of the day, we may well see these things happen more and more across Europe. And the answer goes back to what Andrew was saying, is if you have systems that have more trust, they're more likely to win contracts and do a good job, and that's better for everyone. It does also show, I think, that there is sometimes we worry about the octopus effect. People talked about Goldman Sachs being the big octopus, and people talk about Palantir like taking over the world. There is actually an ability, that for this to be resisted, and for companies to build brands and go to markets around trust, which therein leaves an opportunity, right, for people to
which is the European opportunity, right? This is
my amazing Italian team to become the Epic of Europe, or whatever it may be, and and Andrew's quoted some,
regulation, compliance, and understanding the culture and market in Europe has to be part of this new European moat.
For sure. It's all part of like building a brand and a sales process and everything, especially in these markets.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
the thing that I thought was very interesting, which is slightly a side point, but it's like the Palantir platform was only scheduled to deliver 150 million in cost savings until 2030. But when you put that in the context of the whole NHS budget, it's like, it's piffling. It's piffling.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that a European company...
That's one trust, one annual budget, right? Out of 240 or something they were looking to serve.
Not even, I would have thought. But like, I'm not suggesting that a European company would do any better, but I'm just like, the numbers are so big for these healthcare systems. Anyway.
It's a big contract. Although that said, I mean, let's say it is $500 million in 5 years or 4 years. Maybe that's not massive beans for not massive savings.
100 billion a year on the NHS.